You found the Backup Wrap Up, your go to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we tackle something that a lot of backup folks get wrong: RTO versus RPO. You might think this is a simple topic, but I guarantee there's more here than meets the eye. We're going to break down why these aren't just backup metrics, they're business decisions that should come from your stakeholders, not from IT. And if you're thinking, Curtis, how can you spend an entire episode on these two terms? Well, stick around. We'll show you why these two concepts drive everything from backup frequency to the overall system design, and why getting them wrong can cost your company tons of money. This is one you won't want to miss. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of the production database we just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap Up. Welcome to the show. If I could ask you to take just a quick second to subscribe or follow wherever you're watching us. Remember, you can watch us on YouTube if you want to see our bright and smiling faces, or if you think I have a face built for radio, then you can use the podcast format. But either way, if you follow or subscribe to us, then you'll make sure you get our great content. I am W. Curtis Preston, also known as Mr. Backup. And I have with me a guy who, for some reason today, is just a little bit too bossy. Prasanna Malayandi. How's it going, Prasanna?
I'm good. I think it's also a voice made for letters.
I've never heard that one. I've heard you got a face for radio, buddy. But yeah, I've never heard voice made for letters. You know, there's a guy that I know that I spent some time with actually just last week, and he has a voice for like, basically people are always like, you've got an amazing like radio voice. And
Yeah.
he's actually, he's around my age, maybe even a little bit older, and he's actually trying to become a like someone who does audiobooks.
Oh, nice.
Amazingly, you know what his name is?
What?
His name is Will Shakespeare. This is actually his name. His name is Will Shakespeare. I introduced him to another friend of mine, Robert Louis Stevenson. And
I think you're
I
totally
thought,
making this up.
no, these are two people. I can show them to you on Facebook. I'm friends with Facebook. One of them I know via the IT world. The other one I know via the election worker world. So we're going to talk about, for some people, you know, when you saw the title, you're like, how can you talk about this topic for, a podcast episode? And you know what? This may be one of those times where we're going to have a 10-minute podcast, but I don't think so.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
don't
think?
I don't think that has ever happened. I don't think that will unless like one of us like falls ill in the middle of a podcast.
Yeah, yeah, we do have the ability to jibber jabber. Actually, I'd say more me. I have the ability to jibber jabber, and you have the ability to humor me. Um,
Yeah, these
so
aren't
we're
actually
talking about
headphones. They're
what's that?
actually earmuffs, like hearing protectors, not headphones. I'm just really good at
Yeah,
reading lips.
I'm gonna say that this topic, there are few foundational topics that are more important than the topic that we're talking about today.
Ooh. I
What do you think?
once you introduce the topic, I'm going to ask about the other one that may or may not tie this one.
Okay. I mean, there are things that are very, some of things like, you know, they're like all equal. But I'll just say this: if you're not factoring in this concept when you're designing your backup system and when you're maintaining your backup system, you're just not doing your
Yeah.
job,
Well, and I
right?
think that some people might kind of implicitly be doing some of this without realizing. It's like, sometimes you do things, but you may not use the exact word.
or
right?
you might not use the word.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to make sure that you know the word. And it's actually there's actually 4 words. There's 2 that we're going to start with, and then we're going to add 2 more on top of that.
Can this be like
Today
Sesame
we
Street? This letter is introduced by.
this episode is brought to you by the letters RTO and RPO. That's what we're talking about this week is recovery time objective and recovery point objective. And a lot of people, it's a little bit like the effect and affect.
Mhm.
People always constantly miss the two. And I'm one of those people that constantly, when I
I
when
have to
I
think
read it, I'm like,
twice. Yeah.
I have to think like, is it affect? This is the effect. Um, yeah, like affect is the verb, effect is the noun.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah. Anyway, welcome to English. But why do you think I think RTO and RPO are so important
Because
when designing a backup system?
it drives everything, right? Because it's not only understanding the requirements that are coming from your stakeholders who hopefully you are talking to, right?
Right, right.
But it also it helps define like what your backup system looks like, what technologies you use, right? All the rest of that, all because of these 2 key phrases.
Now I'm gonna put something out there, and I'm gonna confess that in my first several years of working in the backup world, I never once thought about RTO or RPO. And
But
when I say that, I don't mean just the term. I mean
oh,
it's
the concept.
like we really didn't. I'd say we focused a little bit on recovery time, but very little time on the recovery point, right?
So, so before you go any further, can we
Yeah,
first
sure.
define what RPO and
Yeah.
RTO are?
See,
Just
this is
for
why
our
you're
listeners.
here.
Yeah. Just because
This
you're
is why
throwing out
you're
these
here.
terms. And so,
And for those that struggle with the two, right? Give you just my quick thing. And that is so recovery time objective is the goal that we've set that how long a recovery time should take, right? From beginning to end, from bad thing happening, which could be anything from I deleted a file. Generally, we're talking more about disaster recovery here than an individual file, but it could be an individual database.
mhm.
You delete one file, you take a database down, that database is behind a really big application, and poof, we're talking about RTO, right? But it's the time that we agree that a system that it should take the backup and DR system to restore the thing, the entity, whatever it is that has been taken down,
So,
back to fully functional status. How's that?
so I agree with everything except that last sentence you said. And I want to be very careful here because a lot of people like this is called a recovery time objective, not a
Hmm.
restore time objective. A lot of people in backup think it's just getting the data back,
Well, that
which
well,
is yeah,
that's why I put that
yeah,
thing
no,
at
no,
the end.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. But it's not just the restore, right? It's not just
It,
getting the data back, right? It is
yeah. Yeah.
that entity, which I'm glad you put the entity word, right?
Yeah.
Because it's more than just the data. And I think that's an important concept that backup folks should understand is you're just part of the process, right? What you
Yeah.
do is you're restoring the data, but there still has
Mhm.
to be that recovery of bringing the application back online, bringing all the
Mhm.
other components back up, right? Doing making sure that everything is good to go before you actually bring up the application. And all of that is encompassed in the RTO.
Yeah, it's literally from the moment that the thing is damaged to the thing is fully functional,
Yeah.
right? Whatever the thing was,
Yeah.
right? We could be a data center, could be a server, it could be a database, it could be a really important file system
Yeah.
behind,
Yeah.
a database,
But
right?
yeah. And but sorry, I don't mean to be pedantic, but this is also
No,
why
yes, you do. You
I
mean to be pedantic,
today I
but
am
go
bossy,
ahead.
so let me be. So it's really important though, because I think sometimes, like going back to my initial point, right, that you should talk to your stakeholders to understand the business objectives, right?
Hmm.
As a backup team, you are only responsible for a piece of the entire recovery. So make
Agreed.
sure when the business says, I have 4 hours to bring this application to recover this application, whatever it is,
Hmm.
you're just a part of that, right? You can't say,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to take 3 hours and 59 minutes and I'm good,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't
Yeah.
meet the
That's not the
business
case.
objectives.
That's not the case. Agreed. So that's the recovery time objective. And the key there is recovery time, right? Just, when you hear that recovery time, we're talking about the amount of time of the recovery, right? And then the next one is a little bit less obvious, I think. And that is the recovery point objective, which is the amount of data that we've agreed we can lose as measured by time, right? So we agree that in a recovery, we can lose 1 hour's worth of data, 4 hours worth of data, 2 weeks worth of data, whatever the recovery point objective is. It's the amount of data that we have as a business, right? Going to those stakeholders as a business, we've agreed to the amount of data the acceptable amount of data loss as measured by time.
Yeah. I do agree with your definition, right? And I've always thought
Okay.
about it as how much data can I lose? Right. And
Right.
it might be okay, I'm good losing 24 hours. It's not a high change rate application, or it's not a mission critical application versus my financial database that keeps track of all my transactions. That I'm probably not good with the 1 day loss, right? That is probably minutes.
Yeah. It's really about the RPO is driven by the kind of business you're in, the kind of application that we're talking about. And it's driven by the amount of revenue that you would lose when you lose data, right?
Yep.
And just the one key thing is that as measured by time. It's just that normally when we talk about the amount of something in data, we're talking about number of gigabytes or terabytes. In this case, we're saying
Yeah.
as measured by time,
Yeah.
right? So 3 hours worth of data,
Yeah.
not
Which might be a
3
small
gigabytes
amount
worth of
or a
data.
large amount. And
It
I
may,
think
yeah, and
depending on the technology you choose as well, I know you can also get down to fine grain, like outstanding IOs that you are willing to lose in some
right,
of the technologies that you could possibly use.
right. So that's a definition of RTO and RPO, and we say that this is there's a lot of questions that come up here, right? But without those two values, we can't properly design a backup system, right?
Yep.
So here's the question. I'm the backup guy at Umpty Squad Company, and I need to start designing my backup system. What RTO and RPO should I be using?
You don't decide that.
What? I
I
am the
know.
backup guy. I
No.
decide all things backup.
No, Curtis. No, no, no. Because no matter what you pick, if you don't communicate and get the requirements from your stakeholders, they will be wrong and they will always yell at you. And
Yeah,
it's
well,
what,
they'll still probably yell
yeah.
at you,
Well,
but well,
well,
so here's my version of that answer, and that is your RTO and RPO is not a backup decision,
yep,
right? It is a business decision,
yep.
and you you might not even have input on these
Yeah.
numbers. The only input you can have is I can't do that.
Well, I think you have two inputs.
Hmm.
One is I can't do that because it's
Hmm.
technically impossible. The
Hmm.
second is I can do that and it's going to cost you a boatload of money,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Because I think the
Um,
cost is the other thing that you can come back with, which might also sway the business.
Yeah. So the first thing is that the RTO and RPO need to come from on high and from side to side, right? They need to come from you. You've brought up the word stakeholders many times. Why don't you define what we mean when we say stakeholders?
Yeah. So stakeholders are people within your company who are either running the application or who are in the business side who understand the risks with this data and the importance of this data and can help quantify how much is acceptable as an overall company to lose or the amount of time it takes to recover.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of times, like, so you talked about people that are running the application. Sometimes the people running the application don't have any more
Yeah,
knowledge than you
yeah,
do. It's really like the customer of that application, and
yeah,
by customer I mean the internal customer,
yeah,
right? The person, whoever's making these recommendations needs to be somebody with purse strings, right?
yeah,
That knows the business impact of that application, knows the ins and outs of the business and how you make money, how you lose money,
yep,
and because they need to be able to say, look, when this application is down, we're losing $1,000 an hour,
yeah,
whatever it is, right? We're losing, I've worked with companies that say that they will lose $1 million a minute
yep,
of downtime, right? That number, so the how much money will I lose while the system is down? That's going to drive your RTO,
yep,
right? If we're losing $1 million a minute that the system is down, that means I can spend $10 million for a system that's going to get me back up in 5 minutes because there's a fifty
yeah,
percent RTO there, or I'm sorry, ROI.
yep.
There's a 50% ROI there. Um,
But on the
but
flip
that
side,
you've got to go ahead.
if you're like, "Hey, I'm gonna spend $5 million on something that's just gonna cost $1,000 a day if it goes down," you're
Yeah,
probably not gonna
right.
win
You're
that.
not exactly. You're not going to spend $5 million to get to get you that system that can get you a 5 minute RTO if you're only going to lose $1,000 a day,
Yeah,
right? You're just not going to do that, right? So RTO and RPO, or agreeing on the RTO and RPO, are going to drive the cost of the system. So if the amount of money that we lose while the system is down drives the RTO, what drives the RPO?
how much data you can end up losing.
Yeah, I think I, I was asking myself the question in my head
Yeah,
as I was saying it. It's a difficult question because they're very similar.
yeah,
So if you're
but
losing $1,000 a minute,
yeah,
right? The if basically your company is generating revenue at $1,000 a minute, if you lost um, an hour's worth of data, you're going to lose
it's
$60,000.
yeah,
Did I do that math right?
yep, yep,
Right? If you're losing $1,000 a minute, your company's going to lose $60,000 of business that you had,
yep.
if you lose an hour's worth of data. But there's also, in
But then
addition,
RTO also applies with that.
yeah, in addition to the amount of business that your system will, or that your business will lose, either business that it had or business that it could have had. Also, someone needs to be able to come
Quantify.
up with the
Yeah,
intangible things like damage to brand identity,
yep,
right? Um, Also, potential future lost data due to this is primarily, well, it's going to drive both of them,
yeah.
because if you if you took an order from somebody and then that order just disappears
People are gonna be
and you
mad.
don't even know who they are,
Yep.
then not only are you going to not get that business, you're going to anger a
Yeah.
customer, right?
Also, lawsuits potentially.
And potential lawsuits,
Yep.
right? Exactly, right? That's a good point. So you have to think about all of these different things. But again, this is what a business
Yeah.
does. This is not your job as a backup and DR person. This is not your job. If you're listening to this and you're like,
Mm.
gee, this all sounds really complicated and a big responsibility. Yes, it's why it's not yours, right? Um, it's the CEO, the CFO. A lot of people with C's in their names,
Risk management
and then
team.
the people that they appoint under them to make these decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were saying,
Oh,
what were you
the
just
risk
saying?
management team.
Risk management team.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So if RTO and RPO drive backup design, what parts of backup design do RTO drive and RPO drive? So let's do RTO first. What element of backup design does RTO drive?
It's how you do recoveries.
Define how. What do you mean how?
Sorry, mechanisms that you use for recovering your data. For example, do you have a standby DR site available and ready? Do you have data in a replica database? Are you having to retrieve data from tape?
Yeah, all of these are. I was looking for something maybe a little higher level than that. Those are
Come
all
on,
correct
Trevor.
answers. What I was thinking was it's going to disrupt. It's going to drive the design that determines the speed of recovery,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which everything you just said
Falls
determine the
under
speed of
that.
the recovery,
Yeah,
right? If you have an aging system with an aging backup server and an aging storage, and you're having to do a full recovery from older systems, that's going to take a really long time. But if you've got a cutting edge backup system with failover DR, all of these things, then you should be able to do a very quick recovery. You should be able to do a very quick restore, which will
yeah,
enable you to do a very quick recovery. Um, so RTO primarily drives, I'm going to say, the power of the backup system, the oomph, the speed,
yeah.
its ability to restore data quickly. Which sometimes the quickest way to restore data quickly is to restore it before you need it,
Yep.
right? And to not restore it at all, there are mechanisms to either restore the data before you need it or to not restore it at all. What would be a way to not restore it at all?
You basically have a copy sitting there that is always
Or
available,
or
or a
snapshot.
oh,
I know how much you love when I bring that up.
yes, or
So
a snap, which is a
if
copy sitting there.
well, it's a virtual copy,
Okay,
right? It's very important to distinguish that.
but
At least what I would call a real snapshot is a
yeah,
virtual copy.
yes,
Yeah. If you're able to, if it's a copy just ready to go, and you're able to just
use it.
restore, as I make quotes in the air,
Mhm.
by simply going back to an earlier point in time, you're going to get a very quick RTO, right?
Yes, I'm just wondering. Also, I'm wondering though if like even faster, like what's even faster than a snapshot?
I don't know what's faster than a
Because with
snapshot.
the snapshot, you still have to have someone go and restore the snapshot, right?
Well,
But
it's
then
you're not really doing a restore, right? I mean, a good
trigger it.
snapshot
Yeah,
system, you're just doing
yeah, yeah,
pointers, right?
yeah.
So what? I'm not sure what you mean.
So I'm thinking more like, as an example, clustered high availability with the DR replicated copy and automatic failover.
Yeah, yeah, that's all fine, right?
Yeah,
That's all. I don't know if that's faster than a snapshot, but it's
it
very
is.
similar. Basically,
Yeah,
you have stuff it's immediately available and ready to go,
yeah,
right? So there are a number of ways that you can, number of ways from days to seconds
yep,
to meet different levels of RTO um, based on what you're willing to spend and how you're willing to design your backup system,
yeah.
right?
Can I bring up a
Uh,
story?
sure.
So I was listening to a podcast on my walk, and it's
Uh-huh.
of this automotive company. They sell
Yeah.
bolts and nuts,
Okay.
right? And they were talking about how they were a small shop, and they have like 30 people now. And the guy, the co-founder, the CEO founder, he basically ran IT, and they had a bunch
Mhm.
of systems and things like that. And he was kind of managing everything, and then they got hit with ransomware,
Yeah.
and they lost all their data. And then he realized he had a backup, but it was from 3 months ago, right? So his RPO
Nice.
was 3 months,
Nice.
right?
Well,
RPO.
no, his RPO never changed. His RPA. We haven't got to that yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he had. Yes.
Yeah.
And He basically said, though, so they had a bunch of invoices and customers, and luckily they had
Uh-huh.
everything hard copy. He said it took him 6 months to manually
6
enter
months?
to
Wow.
manually enter all the transactions that they were missing before those 3 months.
At least he was able to get,
Yeah.
to put that data back, right?
Yep.
Yeah. By the way, this is just as good a time as any to bring up the terms RPA and or RTA and RPA.
Yep.
So recovery time actual and recovery point actual. So a lot of people say, and I do it occasionally.
Yep.
So it's not like I'm calling you out here, Prasanna. We say, oh, we recovered it in 2 hours, so we had a 2 hour RTO.
Yep.
The so recovery, it's recovery point objective, recovery time objective. This is the goal. This is the service level agreement, right? The
Yep.
SLA.
Oh, so I
The
guess in that example case, they had no agreement because they did
Yeah,
nothing.
that's actually the most common.
Yeah.
That's the most common, right? No SLA, no RTO, RPO. We just do our best case. And but how fast the system is actually able to do something is your RTA and RPA, right? Your recovery time actual and recovery point actual. I've also in various times in my career referred to that as the RTR and RPR, recovery time reality.
Yep.
Um,
How do you
but
calculate that? How do you actually
Well,
figure out
it's
which
the only
RTO?
way to calculate is to actually do it, right?
So hopefully everyone is
Right?
doing restore testing or
Yeah,
recovery testing.
story testing is the only way to know for sure. All right, so let's talk about. We talked about how what aspects of backup design are determined by RTO. What this answer is much easier. What aspect of backup design is determined is determined by RPO.
How frequently can you back up your data?
Yeah. So if you're backing up your data more often, you're going to have a better RPA, right? So if what's the most common backup frequency? Would you say?
Probably once a day.
Yeah, once a day. And so the most common RPA is at minimum 24 hours. Well, there are situations where you might get better than that. If
Yeah.
you, like you said earlier, if you had a failure right after you just finished a backup,
But worst case.
um, that's best case scenario.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario is more like 36 hours
Yeah.
because you're at the end of a day before and the that's assuming that last night's backup worked.
Yeah.
And I've done enough backups to know that that isn't always the case. And I would also say I would apply Murphy's law of backups, which is the degree to which the possibility that a backup is successful is inversely proportional to how much you need that backup.
Yeah. Is there also a Schrodinger's cat for backups?
Yeah,
A backup
yeah,
doesn't exist,
exactly.
or you don't know if a backup exists or not until you actually.
Until you actually look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I think
the
we need that on a t-shirt, by the way. If you
Yeah,
would buy a t-shirt from the
Schrodinger's
backup
backup.
wrap up, right, with these phrases on it, let Curtis know on X or LinkedIn
Yeah,
or somewhere, or leave a comment
yeah,
in the
on
podcast.
YouTube. We've been getting a lot
Yeah.
of YouTube comments lately.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me know on YouTube. By the way, did I tell you? You know how back when I was not feeling well, or I hurt myself, and I said
Yeah.
no one cares. Then I said if anyone cares, please say something. We got comments, and
Aw.
you know what one of them said?
What?
India cares about Curtis.
Aw.
That's what I got. Um, so so RPO basically determines your backup frequency. If you've got an RPO measured in hours, you can't have a backup frequency measured in many hours,
Yeah.
right? And the I will say that just talk about the different ways that people do backups. Sort of normal, regular, what I would call full file incremental backups. Pretty much the best you're going to be able to do is daily, right? If you're able to do some type of block level incremental forever, where each backup, you're only backing up the blocks that have changed, or even better, the deduplicated blocks that have changed, right? Because that's going to be an even smaller set of data. Then you could actually do the back. It does two things. One is it makes the backup quicker, which is good, which generally means that you can do it more often. And then it does allow you. It also reduces the impact of the backup, meaning that while the backup is running, it's not having too much of an impact on production. And so that allows you to do it more often. To
Yeah.
do it, once an hour is very common.
Yeah.
If you've got a modern backup system, you could do it once an hour or
Yeah.
even more often than that.
Yeah. While you're mentioning this about the incrementals and chain block tracking, one thing I realized we didn't cover is depending on what technologies you use, it will have an impact on your RTO. Because if you
Yes,
have, say, multiple recovery points you have to recover from first before you can get to that final point, like if you have to recover a full plus multiple incrementals, that is going to
right.
take you more time, which will impact your RTO
Absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely. I do want to talk. So, what we'll round out this discussion with is that idea that you brought up earlier, which
Which one?
is the that um, every stakeholder is going to want an RTO and an RPO of zero. Because if you ask it like this, how much data, how long are we allowed to be down and how much data are we allowed to lose? And the answer is zero and zero.
Yep.
How do we get from there to something that's more reasonable and possible?
$1 billion.
$1 million. Yeah. What you say? Yeah. So you go back. You're like, okay, all right. We've taken the requirements. We've gone and we've met with the powers that be, and we've decided that if we go with a fully redundant system, with synchronous replication and a hot site that's this far away, we can give you the RTO and an RPO of zero, and it's going to cost $1 billion, right?
Yep.
And you do that with a straight face. Right? You just go, okay, we got a thing, we got a vendor, we got this vendor standing by to take your
Yeah.
check, and we can do it for $1 billion. And then um, what I generally find is at that point, obviously, I have a plan B and a plan
Yeah.
C. And I've also consulted with this vendor, and this vendor says that they can do an RTO and an RPO of 4 hours for only $1 million.
So
$1 million sounds a lot.
yeah,
Sounds
but
like a
it's
lot,
better
except
than
when
a
you're
billion.
comparing it to $1 billion.
So
Yeah.
so here's a question. So as a backup admin, when you're going to these discussions with the stakeholders,
Hmm.
is it worthwhile to go with a couple options like you mentioned where you're like, and what would those common options be, right? Do you think it's 0 0, right? It's a 4 hour RPO, maybe it's a 1 day RPO. Like
Yeah. I
what
think
would
it's going
make
to be.
sense? Yeah.
I think it's going to be driven. Most backup designs, in fact, I'm going to say all backup designs, are driven by cost and reality,
Yeah.
right? So they want zero and zero, or let's say they want 15 minutes. We're like, look, we can do 15 minutes. 15 minutes costs this much. This is the way to do it. Um, if they say we want a very tight RTO, but we're okay with an hour's data loss, right? Snapshots and replication, great way to do that. If they want very, like as close to zero as possible, you've really got to do CDP or something like it. You got to do synchronous replication. And by the way, it's important to mention here that not everything has to have the same RTO and RPO. In fact,
In your environment.
everything should in your environment. Everything should definitely not have the same RTO and RPO. If that's the case, it means you've sort of settled. You've definitely got an application that needs more than that, and you settled for simplicity, which is very common for people to do, but that's not really the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You've got one or two applications within your environment that would really lose a lot of money. And it's totally okay to have a different backup design for them, right? You have the gold, silver, bronze, right?
Yep.
Um, I
Which might
definitely
be,
like, go ahead.
and I know you mentioned backup technology, like a different backup technology. That might also drive having different backup vendors as well to
Yes.
satisfy these different needs.
Yes, it definitely will be. I mean, as a
I
backup
know.
person,
Mm.
my preference is always one vendor if possible. Um, one design with options, because again, simplicity,
Trumps all.
means recovery, I
Yep.
think. But yeah, it is really important to understand that it's very common for you to have multiple RTOs and RPOs within an environment. I will also state, and this is somewhat controversial, and not everybody agrees with me here, it's also okay to have different RTOs and RPOs based on scenario, right? Like if we've got if a server died or a server caught on fire or a server got whatever, server goes poof, it seems to me that RTO and RPO would be
Different.
much shorter than if an asteroid hit Oceanside, right? It's just there are different levels of disasters, and there's different amounts of understanding that you can have. So I think
Yeah.
it's totally okay to have different kinds of RTOs and RPOs for different kinds of
And
scenarios.
and I think this is where we kind of, like, from talking to Mike about our ransomware recovery and other things like that,
Yeah,
right? I think this is where sort of the incident response plans come in, right?
yeah,
Where different scenarios, you may have different RTOs and RPOs because
yeah,
they are different. And there are things
absolutely.
that are outside of your control, like recovering from ransomware is very different because of the initial steps you have to do to isolate and figure out what's going on, rather than, oh, this server, the disk died, now I need to recover, or someone accidentally deleted a file.
Yeah, and by the way, speaking of recovering from ransomware, when we've talked about that, when you get to the actual recovery, it's very common for a person who knows what they're talking about in that world to say, "Listen, I want you might be recovering the same data set 50 different times from 50 different data points." That's something you really got to figure out in your backup design,
Yeah.
right? Because there are backup designs where that is not going to happen anytime soon,
Yeah.
right? Um, but well, hey, once again, we did not do a 10-minute episode.
Mm. Yay, and we're all alive. But hold on. So going back to my initial question I had,
Yeah,
or which is, I know you said RTO and RPO are probably the most important things, foundational things in backup
yeah,
system
yeah.
design.
What did you think?
Do you think that second from that would be the 3-2-1 rule?
Well, the 3-2-1 rule is it is also foundational, right? Um, and yeah, again, is it more important? Is it if you don't follow the 3-2-1 rule and all your backups are all in the same place as the production, why are they're not even backups?
Backups. Yep.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Maybe next episode we should dive down into 3-2-1 rule. We haven't done that in a while.
Yep.
All right, Prasanna, bossy McBossy man.
Eesh.
Um,
Wearing my bossy pants.
I hope you folks have enjoyed our episode this week on RTO versus RPO. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.